child Sage's story with you. I am a proud Aggie alum. I live in Sonoma County now. I don't live here anymore, but I've done my fair share of time here, so it's really fun to be back here. We've been coming back here every year to do the Davis Pride Run Walk since my child Sage Casey wanted to come back and do that run. The second year of the race, actually. Sage was gender fluid and pansexual, so Sage used they, them pronouns. That first year we came, Sage was 13, and it was actually the second year of the race. And Sage had already told many of their friends and a lot of our family face to face and come out to them, but it was really the first time they had publicly been out. And it was such an amazing experience for them to feel like they could be themselves publicly and feel welcomed and loved and accepted, that it was an amazing day for them. They felt loved and they felt community and they felt hope. So Sage had never run a 10K before. So they went into that day a total bundle of nerves, and all they wanted to do was finish. And at the end of the day, they hadn't only finished, they were so pumped and so filled with positive energy by the reception they had when they got there. They ended up winning the entire women's division. It was an incredibly proud day on so many levels, obviously, for Sage, for me, for their little brother Zach, for all of us that came to support Sage, as Gloria said, in obnoxious rainbows, like to a level, if you don't come on that day, you should, but you should really witness to see. It's I'm proud of it, but it can be a little obnoxious, you know. Depends on your perspective. And so it was amazing. For everybody that loves Sage there and from afar, Sage finally felt love for openly being who they were, not in spite of who they were. And I think to a lot of people that's just semantics, but to our kids, some of them struggling so hard and so valiantly to figure out life and figure out themselves, being loved and accepted for who you are, as you are, especially where you're still trying to figure out what that is a really big deal. Whether you're struggling with gender identity or fitting in socially or fitting in culturally in a community. Being loved for who you are, as you are, not being loved in spite of who you are, is a really big deal. And I think that makes all the difference in this world. And I think that was what Sage wanted so badly. I think they needed that. And I think that's one of the things the Davis Phoenix Coalition is doing so well. And so I'm really grateful to be supporting that here in this community. So we were really excited to be returning the following year. We had a whole crew of people coming with us wearing rainbows and being proud and supporting Sage. And then less than 3 weeks before that walk, Sage took their own life. And they were 14 years old. This was a kid who was the vice president of student council. They had straight A's. They were in a GATE program and played drums in their own all-girl jazz band. They wrote original music. That wasn't enough. They decided to take up playing the accordion as well because they wanted to do something different. And they were rocking the accordion. This was a child who, after they died, prompted so many kids to reach out to me and send me messages that I had never even met before. And I was a stay-at-home mom for 10 years, so I drove on all the field trips, I volunteered in the classes, I knew all these kids. I had messages from lots of kids that I didn't even know saying, Sage was my first friend at school. Sage was the one who noticed if I wasn't okay and checked in on me. Sage was the one who noticed if I was off and sent me a message and said, what's up? And I think that was because that was what Sage needed. This was a child who, as you can see, rocked rainbow hair, didn't care, was known for wearing sarcastic and snarky shirts every day that said things like, I'm only sarcastic when I speak. Or, I'd agree, but then we'd both be wrong. I'm not lazy, I'm energy efficient. I can hear you, I'm just not listening. You're awesome, and I'm sarcastic. And one of my favorites, I'm not arguing, I'm just explaining why I'm right. There were a healthy number of bacon-related ones, and Giants shirts too. That kid was a monstrous Giants fan. This was a funny kid, and we miss them so much. There was so much to Sage. And there's a couple of other stories I always tell about Sage because I think it tells so much about their character. And for me, they're reflective of how much I learned from Sage. When Sage was in school one day, one of their friends who was gay was holding hands with a friend of theirs who happened to be straight, not that it should matter, and somebody called him a homophobic slur. And it really hurt Sage. They were both really upset. And so when we were talking about it in the car ride home, I, mama bear that I am, did you tell the teacher? Did you talk to the principal? And Sage said, no, I'm going to take care of it. And that concerned me because Sage had never been in trouble. This is a straight A kid who's always, walked the line. And but I trusted Sage. I trusted Sage's judgment. And so Sage went online that night and through social media rallied the entire school by saying, explaining what had happened and saying, if this is something that you don't agree with, I encourage you to wear rainbows tomorrow and to hold hands with somebody of the same sex. And I got a text from one of her teachers the next morning and said, you should see this school. It's all rainbows. And it's amazing. Your kid did this. And I was totally blown away because I never would have thought of that one. And it was impressive. I don't know if I would have had the nerve to do that now, let alone then. Sage was amazing that way. And another time, just shortly after the 2016 inauguration, when the first Women's March was held, Sage wasn't allowed to go to the Women's March, and they were upset by that. And so, again, with the funny t-shirts, Sage took a t-shirt and turned it inside out and made their own t-shirt that said, sushi rolls, not gender roles. And they made a poster that said, our bodies, our minds, our power. And they said they were going for a walk. And they went out and had their own one-woman, one-person march on the corner, close to where their dad's house was. And they stood out there. And when they texted me what they were doing, my mom and her wife and I went out and joined them. And I was, again, blown away because at 43, I'm pretty sure I wouldn't have had the nerve to go stand out on a corner by myself holding a sign like that alone. And there's my 14-year-old kid showing me how things should be done. Sage was really impressive that way. They weren't disrespectful, but they had absolute power in their convictions and they weren't willing to deny them. And I did tell them often that I had a lot to learn from them, and I meant that. And I think we have a lot to learn from our kids if we can be humble enough to listen, and that's important. They have a lot to say, and I think it's important that they understand that. And so I think that's why it was so important for Sage to find like-minded people to support them. That community and acceptance and love and support. People who aren't able to the people who weren't able to support Sage in their life really caused them a great deal of hurt. And I think that's why Sage went to such length to try to support others, because it was what they needed. So I think what I've learned from that is that sometimes our kids can give each other support that we can't. Sage was lucky to have almost an entire group of friends and family that supported them. They had professional therapists, they had family and friends, they were being treated for depression. Ultimately, it wasn't enough to save Sage. That's devastating to me, but I hope that by sharing Sage's story, it can help somebody else. Many of the youth in our communities don't even have that much, and there are things that we can do to change that. Supporting youth programs for kids and centers where our kids can feel safe and supported is so important, because you don't know what resources they do or don't have somewhere else at home or with their families. And this is an opportunity we can provide where they have social support and emotional support that they may or may not have somewhere else. Anytime we have an opportunity to provide safe, positive spaces to meet and put a positive message of tolerance, inclusivity, and love into the community, I'm really grateful to be a part of that any way I can, and I'm really grateful that the Davis Phoenix Coalition is doing that. One of the things that I've learned while grieving the loss of my child is that there is something irreplaceably comforting about sharing your experience with someone else going through the same thing. It's that they get it. And I think that these youth centers are so critical in the community because that's what these kids can give to each other. Parent and family support is absolutely critical. Make no mistake about that. But peer support is something that's on a different level entirely. These kids need that in a safe, protected, and positive environment. I love that the Davis Phoenix Coalition is providing that and promoting positive models of anti-bullying, anti-hate, LGBTQ positive role models in youth programs in the community. These are places our kids can find common ground, build new friendships, solidify existing ones. It's the kind of programs that I think really would have helped Sage. I hope that by sharing Sage's story, those are some things that maybe touch some of you tonight, and I'm really, really grateful that all of you showed up to support this. I'm so impressed by the turnout here tonight. It's amazing, and I'm looking forward to seeing all of you here in May when we come back for the